This next one is rock. And this word in Hebrew is tzur. It's a pressing rock. So there's another facet or aspect of the rock of our salvation, which is Psalm 95:1. The reason why Psalm 95 is reiterated in Hebrews chapter 3 and 4 is because when they welcomed the Shabbat 3,000 years ago, they sang songs to welcome the Sabbath. So when you read, interesting enough, when you read a NIV, chapter 3 and 4 is actually translated pretty close to literally what it says in the Greek, amazingly enough. And then when you go to the lexicons, they say, oh yeah, that's what it means, but really this is what it means. Anyways, Psalm 95 is the welcoming of the Sabbath psalm. And that's what everybody has been doing for 3,000 years. When they enter into that covenantal relationship and they start doing that and they find the way, they see that there is this thing that welcomes the scriptures that were made by David to solidify the welcoming of the Shabbat. And that Psalm 95 is that song that welcomes. Okay. So now we're talking about number 6697, which is sort of a pressing rock. So when we go through this, this is what we're focusing on, is the tzur. So we're going to start out with the 1 Corinthians 10:4 verse, which is, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ, Mashiach. So in context with chapter 10, with the qualifying statement of for spiritual drink. Okay, so what they're talking about here, you go to verse 1, moreover, brethren, I would not that you should be ignorant how that all of our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink. Okay, this verse 4, they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ, Mashiach. So the qualifying statement, and as I'm pretty sure I covered that before, but this was hidden. This is very consistent throughout Scripture. First you learn some basic fleshly, easily understood things, so you have some basic principle, and then what he does is he relates that to a spiritual thing. But before you can learn the spiritual, you have to have some kind of reference point. And like when I was a kid, I used to marvel over some of the things that I would experience, and I would talk to my parents, and they would look at each other and, what is he talking about? And I didn't know till later when I started learning Scripture that people, certain types of spiritual things, when you're talking about them, people are hard of hearing. And everybody that sometimes experiences that themselves, they're like, what did that person just say? And then as they learn spiritual things, they start talking about it, and they're like, wow, that person didn't hear a word I just said. And so in essence, Scripture's true. 1 Corinthians 3, 1 through 3, and Hebrews chapter 5 talks about a babe being in the flesh still and not understanding the spirit. So spiritual drink, you learn the fleshly things, which transfers testimony into the spiritual. You have to there has to be that bridge. So we understand through the revelation of the New Testament, the covers are taken off, the spiritual drink, and we start going through and we start understanding this tzur. This tzur is very important. 105:41, Psalms. He opened the rock and the waters gushed out. They ran in the dry places like a river. All right. So there was a spiritual thing that was happening in their midst. They didn't fully understand it, so it takes them out into the dry places and shows them a physical miracle of the rock being split, and out of the water, out of the rock flows the water that causes life within the community. And they saw it, and it was a witness and a testimony to his authority, dominion, power. So when we're sitting here reading this stuff, and you go through Psalm 105, you go a couple verses before that, he spread a cloud for covering and fire to give light in the night. People asked and brought quail, satisfied them with the bread of heaven. All right, so in context, the revelatory statement in 1 Corinthians 10:4 shows the physical reiteration, the testimony. You go to Isaiah 20, do they not speak according to the law and to the testimonies because there's no light in them? So there's a testimony of learning the physical things that we can see and relate to, so that we can bridge over to the unseeable things, the things that aren't easily comprehended. And this is the point of the pressing rock. These things press upon us so that we can have an understanding. The tsur, used as a tsur, is because there's a physical thing here pressing upon the people. They're like, wow, did all this water really come out of that rock? You know, and so it's, you know, they know it's a miracle. You know, they know that there's something extraordinary here. So, and it presses upon them. Tsur, pressing. This presses upon us and helps us to understand the link to the unseen. So as we go further along, we go to Psalm 114:8. And it says, which turned the rock into a standing water, the flint into a fountain of waters. The reason why standing water is important to understand is because sheep normally don't drink running water. It has to be still. So standing water, sheep, they hear the master's voice and they drink the standing water. Okay, that's important. That's the little nuance there of, here you go, and it's all nice and neat. So the standing water, Psalm 114:8, sheep. Okay, so we go further along to Isaiah. As I reiterated past, it's the apostles and the prophets. You have to have and the prophets. Like he said, I did not come to do away with the law or the prophets. I come to fulfill. The understanding that he fulfills is you read it, you believe it, and then the pressing of the rock from what you're looking at, the pressing causes you the revelation. Without the pressing, there's not going to be a revelation. And as you go forth and you get a partial, like I've done with everything. He's given me a portion or a part with it, and I ran and stumbled upon the rock. That's what he does. He gives everything in a sequence, in an order, so that we have a true and right testimony, where you just don't get the whole thing all at once. That's a lie. You get parts like a child. You can't just flood them with calculus. They have to go through the process of addition and subtraction and multiplication. There's a whole process of learning. All these things that we learned how to learn come from Scripture, from Him, and we relate that to other things. So in Isaiah 17:10, again, I'll read it. Because thou hast forgotten the God of your salvation, the rock, and hast not been mindful of the rock of your strength, therefore shall you plant pleasant plants and shall set it with strange slips. So pretty simple. Why do we have so many doctrines? 2 Thessalonians 2:11. You don't receive the love of the truth. Love the truth. Be patient. You be usefully employable, kind in the words you speak, and how you apply and learn this causes the pressing of the rock and the revelatory state. But when you are not, and you're forgetting these things, then what happens is strange slips. You're a pleasant plant, you're planted over here, and it's like with a bunch of weeds and stuff. You're all sorts of crazy notions flying around you, and you're not having any fellowship or nothing. You're arguing with everybody. You have the truth, and it's just not manifesting because you're in a strange place. All right. The next pressing upon is Isaiah 48:21. And you thirsted not. There has to be a thirsting. When he led them through the desert, he caused the waters to flow out of the rock for them. He clave the rock also, and the waters gushed out. The whole thing about Moses striking the rock, and then he was supposed to speak to the rock. That's an important, and a very, very important teaching of Scripture about obedience. Okay? There is no, 22, there is no peace, saith Jehovah, unto the wicked. This word, rashag, best translated from Hebrew into English, is unjust, unfair. And without speaking evil of things before hearing the whole matter, we become unjust and selfish and self-centered. And the rock helps us to become loving or selfless. To be truly, the biblical definition, if it's summed up in one word, would be selflessness. Where on the contrast of that is selfishness. Okay, without him, we're going to always remain some kind of selfishness within us. And the simplistic nature of our language, used appropriately, can identify that. And that concludes the whole pressing, the pressing of learning. Things are around us and they press against us, and that pressing causes the revelatory state.